The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, sharp and final, as if it had struck the walls of my chest. Case number 2084, Martin versus Martin. That's what they called it. Not mother and child, not family dispute. Just two strangers fighting over what was left of a man we both loved. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my palms damp, a pen trembling between my fingers. Across the room sat my mother, the woman who used to braid my hair before school, who once kept a nightlight on because I was afraid of the dark. But that woman was gone. The person sitting across from me now looked like a stranger wearing her face. Stiff posture, cold eyes, a pearl necklace that gleamed like a warning. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, and she nodded, her expression unreadable. She didn't even look at me. The air was thick. Courtroom air always is, heavy with perfume, paper, and tension. My attorney, Mr. Rowe, gave me a small nod, as if to say, hold steady. I tried. But my chest was full of years of unsaid words. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to us. When Dad died 2 years ago, he left behind a house, a savings account, a collection of old cameras, and apparently, a war. He didn't leave a will, not a formal one. There was only a note scribbled in his shaky handwriting, taped to the back of his favorite photograph. Take care of each other. But we didn't. The first few weeks after the funeral were quiet. Too quiet. Mom stopped talking to me unless it was about bills or papers. Then one day, a letter arrived from her lawyer, claiming ownership of everything. She said Dad's assets rightfully belonged to her, not me. I remember staring at the words, my throat tight. She's suing me? Now here we were. Judge Holloway entered, his robe flowing behind him like a dark curtain. Everyone stood. When we sat again, I could hear the soft shuffle of papers and my own pulse in my ears. Mom's lawyer started. He spoke with rehearsed sympathy, painting her as a grieving widow who had been taken advantage of by a manipulative child. My client only seeks what is rightfully hers, he said, his voice smooth and controlled. She lost her husband. She should not lose her home, her security, her future. I clenched my fists under the table. Her security? Her home? That house wasn't just brick and wood. It was where Dad taught me to fix cameras, where Mom used to hum while cooking. It was supposed to be our shared memory, not a weapon. When my turn came, Mr. Rowe stood, calm but firm. With all due respect, he said, my client was the one who cared for Mr. Martin through his final illness. She was there every day. She isn't taking her mother's home. She's trying to keep the last piece of her father's legacy intact. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes down. I couldn't look at her. Not yet. The judge listened quietly, jotting notes. When the first recess was called, I finally looked up. Our eyes met for the first time in months. Her stare was sharp, almost triumphant. I didn't see grief in it. I saw possession. She walked past me on her way out, her perfume, that same lavender scent from my childhood, brushing the air between us. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered to her lawyer and laughed softly. That sound cut deeper than any argument. When we resumed, witnesses were called, neighbors, friends, even my father's old accountant. Each word felt like a nail sealing something shut. Mom sat straight-backed, answering questions with mechanical precision. She had rehearsed this. Every detail, every lie. Then the judge turned to me. Ms. Martin, he said. Would you like to speak? I stood, legs shaking slightly. Yes, Your Honor. I walked to the center of the room. Every step echoed. When my father died, I began. I didn't think about money. I thought about how quiet the house became. I thought about how my mother stopped coming into my room, how she locked his study and said it was too painful to see. I thought, maybe grief does strange things to people. My voice wavered. The judge watched me carefully, but I never imagined it would bring us here. I turned toward her then, finally, directly. You taught me that family matters more than anything, remember? You used to say, love is the only thing that doesn't get divided when you share it. And now you're asking the court to take even the memories he left me. Her jaw tightened, eyes glinting with anger. My client objects to this emotional, her lawyer started. Overruled, the judge said quietly. Continue. I took a shaky breath. She's not just asking for the house or the money. She's asking for everything my father built. Even the cameras he said were mine. The ones I use for my work. She told me once I wasn't successful enough to deserve them. There was a murmur in the courtroom. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. I just stood there, the truth between us like an open wound. The judge cleared his throat. We'll continue this tomorrow, he said. Court adjourned. The gavel came down again. Another blow, another break. As people began to file out, I looked once more at the woman who used to be my mother. She gathered her things calmly, as if she hadn't just torn open the remains of our family. And yet, even as I watched her walk away, part of me still hoped she'd turn back. Just once, just to meet my eyes and remember who I was. But she never did. She didn't look back at all. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, not because I wanted to, but because sleep had become impossible. My dreams were filled with echoes of the courtroom, my mother's cold stare, the sharp crack of the gavel, the way her lawyer said my client, like I was a stranger who'd wronged her. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the photograph of Dad on my nightstand. It was one he took himself, a candid shot of us laughing in the backyard, sunlight spilling across our faces. He used to say, "You can't fake real smiles. Cameras always know." If that were true, then every smile in my mother's old albums was a lie now. I made myself coffee, though it tasted like dust. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, a sound that felt lonelier than silence itself. My phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Rowe. Be ready by 9. They're calling in financial records today. Stay calm. Stay calm. As if that were easy when your own mother was trying to erase your life. The drive to the courthouse was a blur of gray clouds and traffic lights. My thoughts kept drifting backward, to the moment this war began. It was 3 months after Dad's funeral. I was sorting through boxes in his study, organizing his things for donation. That's when Mom walked in, holding a stack of documents. Leave those, she said sharply. They're not yours. I froze. I'm just putting them away, Mom. These are his photography notes, not legal papers. She stepped closer, her eyes glassy. You don't understand. Everything in this house, everything, was your father's, which means it's mine now. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. But her face didn't move. What about the cameras? I asked softly. Dad told me? He told you things he had no right to promise, she cut in. Those cameras are worth thousands. They'll go toward the estate. I remember the way her voice cracked on that last word, estate. It didn't sound like grief. It sounded like hunger. That night, I found out she'd already called a lawyer. And just like that, the woman who used to tuck me in at night filed a claim to take everything my father had left, from the savings account I helped him manage to the smallest item he'd meant for me. A sealed letter addressed in his handwriting. The envelope simply said, "For my daughter. Read when you're ready," but she locked it away, insisting it was part of the estate. I begged her for it. Tears running down my face. Her answer was a slap. That was the night I packed my things and left the house. Now, months later, she sat across from me in court, calm as a saint while her lawyer displayed bank statements on a projector. Mr. Martin's retirement funds were solely in his name, he said. There is no documented transfer to his daughter. Therefore, Mrs. Martin maintains full rights to all remaining assets. I could feel every eye on me. The judge looked neutral, unreadable. Mr. Rowe stood. Your Honor, the defendant conveniently omits the fact that Ms. Martin was her father's full-time caretaker during his illness, a fact supported by medical and witness statements. She paid out of pocket for his medications when insurance ran out. That was never reimbursed. Mom's lawyer shrugged. Emotional sacrifices do not equate to financial ownership. I wanted to scream. To stand up and tell them about the nights I sat beside Dad's hospital bed, holding his hand as he faded in and out of consciousness. About how Mom rarely visited during those months, claiming it was too painful. But I stayed silent. My father once told me, "Truth doesn't need shouting, sweetheart. It just needs time." So I waited. During the lunch recess, I sat on the courthouse steps, staring at the sky. The clouds had thinned, letting slivers of sunlight peek through. I tried to remember the last time Mom and I talked without venom in our voices. It had been the night before Dad's surgery. She'd been sitting in the kitchen, staring at her reflection in a cup of tea. "Promise me," she whispered, "that no matter what happens, we'll stay together." I promised. And now she was tearing us apart. When court resumed, her lawyer presented an inventory list. Everything she was demanding. The family house, my father's life insurance, all photography equipment, his savings account. And that sealed letter. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the list aloud. Mr. Rowe leaned toward me. "That letter," he whispered. "Do you know what's in it?" I shook my head. "No, but she doesn't either." For a moment, he just looked at me, puzzled, then intrigued. "We might need that." The judge called the session to a close for the day. Mom didn't glance my way as she gathered her files. She walked out with her lawyer, their conversation low and confidential. But as she passed, she brushed her eyes over me, cold, assessing, as if I were just another obstacle. That look burned deeper than her words. Outside, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. I thought about the letter again, about Dad's shaky handwriting, the way he'd looked at me that last night in the hospital. He had whispered something then, something I hadn't thought much about at the time. "Don't let her destroy what's left of you." Now I finally understood. This wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about money. It was about the one thing she couldn't control, the truth. And somewhere in that sealed letter, I was certain, was the key to everything. The third day in court began with rain, the kind that soaks through umbrellas, fills the air with static, and makes everything feel heavier than it should. It was fitting, I thought, a gray day for a gray war. When I entered the courtroom, Mom was already seated at the defendant's table. She looked immaculate as always, navy suit, silver earrings, hair pinned back with surgical precision. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, then away, like I was no more than a passerby. Her lawyer, Mr. Harlan, gave a curt nod as if to acknowledge a worthy opponent. But I wasn't here for him. I was here for the truth. Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses and called us to order. "Let's proceed," he said. "We'll begin with testimony from Mrs. Martin." Mom stood, her posture regal, her voice smooth and practiced. "I raised my daughter alone after my husband's passing," she began. "I gave her everything, food, a home, an education. But when my husband died, she took advantage of my grief. She manipulated documents, kept his medical funds for herself, and began taking property that was rightfully mine." Her words sliced through me like ice. Every sentence was a lie, perfectly packaged in sincerity. She didn't even tremble. People in the courtroom whispered. Some looked at me with pity. Others looked at her and nodded. She was convincing, heartbreakingly so. I could see it in the judge's eyes. He was listening. Really listening. When she finished, she dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her performance complete. Her lawyer squeezed her shoulder like a director congratulating an actor on a flawless scene. Mr. Rowe stood. "Your Honor, may I cross-examine?" The judge nodded. Mr. Rowe approached the stand, his voice calm. "Mrs. Martin, can you tell the court where you were during your husband's final hospitalization?" Mom hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before replying, "At home. I visited when I could." "When you could?" he pressed. "Records show you visited twice in the final 2 months." Her jaw tightened. "I was grieving. Watching him suffer was unbearable." "I understand," Mr. Rowe said softly. "But did you know your daughter paid the hospital bills when your husband's insurance was denied?" The courtroom murmured again. Mom blinked. "That's not true." Mr. Rowe lifted a document from his briefcase. bank statements from Ms. Martin's account, showing payments made directly to the hospital. He handed the paper to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. For the first time, Mom's expression cracked. Only slightly, a flicker in the eyes. Judge Holloway read the document, then looked at her. "Do you have an explanation for this?" Mom shifted in her seat. "My daughter insisted on handling those things." "I thought she used our funds." Mr. Rowe stepped back. No further questions. It wasn't a victory, but it was the first hit. A small fracture in her glass facade. By midday, the rain had grown louder, hammering against the tall courthouse windows like a heartbeat. The sound filled every pause, every silence between testimonies. When my turn came to testify, I took a deep breath and stood. My heart felt like it was climbing into my throat. Mr. Rowe smiled at me reassuringly. "Ms. Martin," he began, "in your own words, why are you here?" I looked at the judge, then at my mother. "Because my father wanted his memory to mean something, not to become a weapon." I described the letter, the one sealed in Dad's handwriting, and how Mom had locked it away with his belongings. "She told me I wasn't ready to read it," I said softly. "But I think she was the one who wasn't ready for what it said." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Mom's lawyer objected immediately. "Speculation. The letter's contents are unknown and irrelevant." The judge held up his hand. "Noted, but continue, Ms. Martin. Carefully." I nodded. "All I know is that my father trusted me with it. And somehow that trust, that simple act of love, became something to fight over." My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. This case isn't about greed. It's about control. She lost Dad, and instead of grieving, she tried to own what was left of him. But love doesn't work like that. The room went silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. When I sat down, Mr. Rowe gave my hand a subtle squeeze. The judge's face was unreadable, but I saw something shift, a shadow of thought, of doubt. After a short recess, the tension in the air felt sharper. Mom was whispering to her lawyer, her voice low but urgent. Her polished calm was slipping. I caught fragments of her words. "We can't let that letter surface." Something inside me twisted. That letter, it was the one thing she feared. When the session resumed, Mr. Harlan tried to regain control. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is being clouded by emotional narratives. My client's rights are simple and legal. She was the spouse. The daughter has no valid claim without written transfer or will." Judge Holloway rubbed his temples. "I'll review all documentation by tomorrow. We'll reconvene at 9 a.m. Final arguments will be heard then." Gavel down. Session over. But as the room emptied, Mom turned her head slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. "You're making a mistake," she said under her breath, low enough that only I could hear. "You don't know what you're playing with." Her tone wasn't angry. It was fearful. And in that moment, I realized something that made my skin crawl. She wasn't fighting for what she wanted. She was fighting to keep something buried, something inside that letter, something she'd done, terrified her. And tomorrow, I decided I would find out what. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the sky hadn't decided whether to forgive or thunder again. I parked in front of the courthouse earlier than usual. The marble steps were slick with dew, and my reflection wavered faintly in the glass doors as I pushed them open. Mr. Rowe was already inside, sipping coffee from a paper cup. His eyes were tired but sharp. "Did you sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "Barely." He handed me a file. "This came in late last night. The hospital records you mentioned. Turns out your father signed a final consent form. Something about a sealed letter. He filed it as part of his end-of-life documents." My pulse skipped. "You're saying it's official?" He nodded slowly. "Filed under your name, not hers. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of power, but beneath that, something else. Dread. Because whatever was inside that letter, my mother had fought like hell to keep it hidden. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, almost reverent. The crowd had thinned. Word had spread that the case might end today. When Mom entered, her expression was controlled, but her eyes told a different story. Fear. Subtle, buried deep beneath defiance, but it was there. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering something to her, but she didn't respond. The judge began promptly. "We're here to review final arguments," he said. "Before we proceed, I've been informed that new evidence has been submitted overnight." Mr. Rowe stood, holding up a thin folder. "Yes, Your Honor. Hospital records confirming that Mr. Martin left behind a sealed letter specifically addressed to my client, and to no one else." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. Mom's lawyer immediately rose. "Objection, Your Honor. That document has not been authenticated. It could have been altered." The file came directly from St. Gregory's Hospital, time-stamped, notarized, and archived. Mr. Rowe interrupted smoothly. "It's legitimate." Judge Holloway looked between us. "Do you have the letter in your possession?" I hesitated. "No," I said quietly. "It's still locked in the estate safe. My mother refuses to release it." The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Martin?" Mom's voice was steady but thin. "That letter is private. My husband's personal writings are my property." "With respect," Mr. Rowe said, "not if it was legally entrusted to his daughter." The judge tapped his pen thoughtfully. "We'll verify that claim." He leaned forward. "But before we move further, Mrs. Martin, I'd like to ask, why would you prevent your daughter from reading a letter addressed to her by her dying father?" Mom froze. Her lawyer whispered, "You don't have to answer that." But she did. And she knew it. "I wanted to protect her," she said finally. "There were things he wrote that would only cause pain." I stood abruptly, unable to stay silent. "You mean truths?" Her gaze snapped to me, sharp, wounded, furious. The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Martin, please," but it was too late. The air was electric. Something in me, in both of us, had reached its breaking point. The proceedings paused for a short recess. The courtroom emptied, but I stayed behind, staring at the empty judge's bench. My mother stood near the window, her arms folded. I walked toward her. "You could have just told me what was in it," I said softly. She didn't turn around. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." She finally faced me. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something heavier. "He wasn't the man you thought he was," she said, voice trembling slightly. He wasn't perfect." "Neither are you," I said, my voice breaking. "But at least he loved me." Her lip quivered, but she held firm. "Love isn't what you think it is. He did things you wouldn't forgive." "Then why are you the one hiding?" Her silence said everything. The bailiff called us back in. We took our seats. My hands were shaking, not from fear but anticipation. I could feel it in the air. Something was about to snap. The judge cleared his throat. "Before we move to closing arguments, I'd like to make a final inquiry. Mrs. Martin, unless you have a legal reason to withhold the letter, I will be issuing a court order to open it." Her face went pale. "No," she whispered. "You can't, Mrs. Martin," he said sternly. "The court—" But before he could finish, I stood up. "Your Honor, may I approach?" He nodded. I walked forward, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me, and I whispered two words that turned his face ashen, his pen falling from his hand. He looked at me, eyes wide. "Are you certain?" I nodded. The entire courtroom held its breath. The judge glanced at my mother, his expression shifting from surprise to grim understanding. "Court will recess immediately," he said, voice tight. "Both counsels to my chambers. Now." The gavel struck once, and the sound echoed like thunder. The room erupted. Reporters whispered, people gasped, and my mother stumbled to her feet. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. "What did you tell him?" I didn't answer, because what I'd whispered weren't just words. They were the truth my father had left me, buried in that letter, and one I'd discovered in those hospital records the night before. And those two words carried the weight of everything she'd been hiding for years. Two words that changed everything. The judge's chamber's door shut behind my mother and her lawyer with a low thud, leaving a strange stillness in the courtroom. Reporters whispered like rustling leaves, cameras clicked softly, and I just stood there, frozen, watching the door that had swallowed them. Mr. Rowe placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. I wasn't sure. My heart was still racing from the moment. I'd leaned forward and whispered those two words. The words that had made the judge's face drain of color. Those words were fraudulent will. And in the silence that followed, I had watched my mother's world start to crack. 30 minutes later, the door opened again. Judge Holloway emerged first, expression grave, followed by the lawyers. My mother trailed behind them, pale and trembling. Her composure was gone. Her eyes darted around the courtroom like she was searching for an escape route. When the judge took his seat, he spoke slowly, deliberately. "This court has reviewed new evidence submitted by both parties," he said. "The evidence includes notarized documents, hospital records, and handwriting analyses regarding the late Mr. Martin's final estate filings." He glanced at me briefly, then at her. "It appears," he continued, "that certain documents presented by Mrs. Martin's counsel were altered after Mr. Martin's death." Gasps rippled through the room. Mom's lawyer immediately stood. "Your Honor, my client denies any—" "Sit down, Mr. Harlan," the judge said sharply. "The court has already verified the inconsistencies. The letter in question, the one withheld from Ms. Martin, was, in fact, referenced in the original will, which was removed from the estate file before submission. The missing lines contain a transfer of ownership, explicitly assigning the house, the cameras, and the savings to the daughter." The room went completely silent. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Mom stared straight ahead, unblinking. Her hand clutched the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. The judge sighed. "Mrs. Martin, can you explain why this document was altered under your signature?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then finally, a whisper. "I was protecting what was mine. By falsifying your husband's will?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't the kind that came from sadness. They came from exposure, the kind that burns when you realize there's nowhere left to hide. "I gave him my whole life," she said, her voice breaking. He wanted to leave everything to her. He said I didn't understand him anymore, that he wanted her to continue his work. Do you know what that feels like?" Her gaze snapped toward me, trembling with rage and grief. "To be replaced by your own child?" I flinched. For a moment, I saw not the manipulative woman across from me, but the mother who once cried in the kitchen when Dad forgot their anniversary. "Mom," I started softly, but she shook her head violently. "No," she spat, voice trembling. "You took him from me even before he died. You sat by his side, you read to him, you made him smile again, and I couldn't. So he gave you everything. Everything I built with him." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The judge cleared his throat. "Regardless of personal feelings, forgery is a felony, Mrs. Martin. The evidence leaves little doubt. This court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Martin, all assets originally assigned by Mr. Martin shall be reinstated in her name." His gavel came down. Sharp, final. But I didn't feel relief, because as my mother's shoulders crumpled, as the bailiff approached her for questioning, I realized this wasn't victory. This was the death of something that used to be love. Outside the courthouse, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, turning the wet pavement into liquid gold. Reporters swarmed around me, microphones flashing. "Ms. Martin! Did you know your mother altered the documents? How does it feel to win against your own parent? What did you whisper to the judge?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my heels clicking against the marble. Mr. Rowe caught up beside me. "We'll handle the paperwork," he said gently. "You don't have to go back in there." But I stopped. "I do," I said quietly. "Just for a minute." I turned around and walked back toward the courthouse steps. Through the glass doors, I could see her, sitting alone now, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. No lawyers, no cameras, No armor. Just her. For a long moment I stood there, watching her, remembering her laughter, her perfume, the nights she used to kiss my forehead before bed. Then she looked up and saw me through the glass. Our eyes met, and for the first time she didn't look angry. She just looked old. She mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I could read her lips. I'm sorry. I nodded once, tears stinging my eyes, and turned away. That evening, I drove home in silence. The house felt different when I walked in, both heavier and lighter at the same time. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the small envelope Mr. Rowe had handed me earlier. The one retrieved from the hospital's records. Department inside was the original letter. Dad's handwriting was shaky but still unmistakable. My dearest girl, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. But know this, I never doubted your heart. You carry the best of both of us. Forgive her if you can. She's been afraid of being alone her whole life. Don't let that fear live in you. Take care of what matters, and not the house, not the money. The truth. And yourself. Love always, Dad. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. Outside, the last rays of sunlight were fading, painting the sky in quiet gold, the color of endings and forgiveness. The following weeks felt strangely hollow, like living in a house where the echoes had grown louder than the people. The court had ruled in my favor. I had the house, the funds, the studio equipment, all the things my father had wanted me to have. But none of it felt like victory. Every creak of the floorboards, every framed photograph on the wall, reminded me of what I'd lost in the process, and what she had lost too. It was late one evening when I finally returned to the old photo studio, Dad's pride and joy. Dust floated through the shafts of light spilling from the window. The scent of developing fluid still lingered faintly in the air. His old camera sat on the table where he'd left it, as if waiting for one last photograph. I stood there for a long time, running my fingers over the camera's worn edges. It was the same one he'd used to take my first school picture. The same one Mom had once used to photograph their anniversary, before things fell apart. For the first time in years, I picked it up. I turned the lens toward the light, adjusted the focus, and clicked the shutter. The sound echoed like a memory coming full circle. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail. From her. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed, neatly folded, and delivered through her lawyer's office. My hands shook as I opened it. Emily, I've been advised not to contact you directly, but I couldn't leave things the way they ended. I know what I did was unforgivable. I was drowning in fear. Fear that I'd been forgotten, that he'd loved you more than me. I told myself lies until they became truth. I see now that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Maybe this is what mine had become. Twisted, desperate, but still love in its own way. I won't ask you to forgive me, but I hope someday when you think of me, it's not with hate. Mom, I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands. For a long time, I didn't know whether to cry or tear it apart. Instead, I folded it back carefully and placed it inside Dad's old camera bag, right next to his last letter, because no matter what she'd done, she was still my mother. And if Dad could ask me to forgive her from beyond the grave, maybe I owed him that much. Weeks passed. I started restoring the studio, not as a business, but as a space for memories. I rehung Dad's photos, cleaned the lenses, and printed a few of the last images he'd taken before he passed. Portraits of people smiling, unaware of how much time they had left. Each day, the room grew warmer, brighter, more alive. One afternoon, as I was developing a photo, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a woman stood there, frail, her posture hunched, eyes cautious. Mom. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy with all the words we'd never said. I wasn't sure you'd answer, she whispered. I wasn't sure you'd come, I replied softly. She looked around the studio behind me, her eyes glistening. He loved this place, she said, her voice trembling. I nodded. So did you, she smiled weakly. Once? We stood there in silence for what felt like forever, until I finally stepped aside. Do you want to come in? She hesitated, then nodded. Inside, she walked slowly, touching the photographs on the wall. Their wedding portrait, my childhood pictures, his landscapes. I forgot how beautiful his work was, she murmured. Yeah, I said quietly. He saw beauty in everything. She turned to me then, her eyes brimming with tears. Even in me? The question hit like a stone in water, rippling through years of pain. Yes, I whispered. Always, and that was it. She broke, her tears falling freely as she covered her face. I moved closer, uncertain at first, then wrapped my arms around her. For the first time in decades, we held each other without anger between us. Later, we sat together in silence, sipping tea in the same kitchen where so many fights had once erupted. The sunlight streamed in through the window, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a battlefield. I'm moving soon, she said quietly, somewhere quiet. Maybe near the coast, I smiled faintly. That sounds nice. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I found this when I was packing, she said. It was his. Inside was a silver locket, one I'd never seen before. I opened it. Inside, there was a photo of me on one side, and her on the other. Guess he couldn't pick favorites, I said with a shaky laugh. Her tears shimmered again, but this time they weren't full of pain. When she left, she hugged me at the door, tight, trembling, real. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For giving me one last chance to be your mom. Months later, I hung a new photograph on the studio wall, a picture I'd taken of her that afternoon, standing in the doorway with sunlight wrapping around her like forgiveness itself. Below it, I wrote a small caption. Sometimes love survives even after truth burns everything else away. And every time I walked past it, I smiled. Because for all that had been lost, something precious had survived. Not untouched, but transformed. It wasn't about inheritance or revenge or court victories. It was about what remained after the storm, and for the first time in years. That felt like enough.